Every 30 years, we feed the woods. You think a park ranger's job is to keep you safe from the woods, but that's only half the truth. The real work, the part that never makes it into an official incident report, is keeping the woods safe from you. Because every 30 years, this holler gets hungry, and it doesn't care about your jurisdiction. The initial call came over the dispatch radio just after 1400 hours, a crackle of static and procedure that sliced through the quiet monotony of a Tuesday afternoon. Bridger Station, this is Teton Dispatch, requesting ranger assistance for a possible 1053, Sector 4. A man down, a missing person. Standard operating procedure. In my first 6 months here, I'd handled 3, all resolved within a day: a dehydrated tourist, a teenager who'd gotten turned around, and an elderly birdwatcher who'd taken a bad fall. This felt no different. I keyed the mic. Bridger Station copies, Ranger Vance responding. My supervisor, Ben Carter, looked up from the topographical map he was perpetually annotating. His office smelled of pine sap, old paper, and stale coffee. Ben was carved from the same granite as the peaks around us, weathered and deeply lined, with eyes that seemed to hold the long, empty silence of a winter landscape. "Hayes, Julian, 24 years old," he said, sliding a thin manila folder across his desk without looking at me. His voice was a low rumble, like rocks shifting deep underground. "Cars at the Granite Canyon trailhead. Log says he signed in yesterday morning for a day hike. Didn't sign out." I scanned the single sheet of paper. Julian Hayes. A photo showed a smiling young man with a thatch of dark hair, standing in front of a waterfall. An experienced hiker, according to the notes from his frantic girlfriend. He knew the area. That was the first small flag, the kind you learn to notice after a few years on the job. The ones who know the terrain are often the ones who get into the worst trouble. They push harder, take risks the tourists wouldn't dream of. "I'll assemble the SAR unit, start a preliminary grid search from his point last seen," I said, my voice crisp with the confidence of training manuals and successful ops in my last post down in Arizona. This was a bigger, wilder jurisdiction, a challenge I'd wanted, and I was determined to prove I could handle it. Ben didn't move. He just watched me, that still, unsettling gaze of his pinning me to the spot. "Stick to the main trail system, Vance. Run your grids west of Cascade Creek. Do not cross it after sundown." I paused, folder in hand. "Sir?" "His intended route follows the creek bed into the North Badlands. If we're going to find him before a second nightfall, we'll need to cover that ground." He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in protest. "The protocol is clear. After dusk, all personnel fall back to the trailhead. That's an order." He then added, in a quieter tone that felt less like an order and more like something else, something heavier. "Some places out there, they're different when the light goes. The old-timers will tell you that holler has a temper. It's best not to be there when it wakes up." I managed a tight, professional nod, but inside I felt a flash of irritation. It was the kind of folksy wisdom I'd heard from lifers in every park I'd ever worked. Every region had its boogeymen, its superstitions born from isolation and too many long nights. I chalked it up to mountain fatigue, the psychological toll of a career spent staring into the vast, indifferent wilderness. It was a warning, but one I filed under local color, not official procedure. I was here to run a search and rescue operation, not to entertain ghost stories. By 1900 hours, the search had yielded nothing. We found the scuff marks of hiking boots a half-mile in, then the trail went cold. The forest was preternaturally still, the usual chatter of birds and squirrels conspicuously absent. More than once, my team's GPS units flickered, losing satellite lock in a wide-open clearing for seconds at a time before recalibrating. "Just electronic glitches," I told my team. "Mountain interference." But a knot of unease had begun to tighten in my gut. It was the silence that got to me most. The woods felt expectant. Back at the station, I filed my initial incident report, a document filled with the clean, sterile language of failure. No subject contact. Search area exhausted. Operations suspended pending daylight. Ben read it over, his expression unreadable. He simply initialed the bottom and pushed it back toward me. Get some rest, Vance. We go again at 0600. But I couldn't rest. The image of Julian Hayes' smiling face was superimposed over the silent, darkening woods. I went back to the archives, a dusty room in the station's basement, telling myself I was just looking for any old search reports from that sector that might offer a clue. A hidden ravine, a treacherous patch of scree. I pulled Julian's file. Then, on a whim, I searched the cold case cabinet, pulling the drawer for unresolved missing persons. The first file I opened was from September 1993. A woman named Sarah Jenkins, a geologist doing survey work, vanished from the Cascade Creek area, experienced outdoors woman. No trace ever found. The next file was dated September 1963. A hunter, Michael Reed, disappeared in the same 10-square-mile jurisdiction. Lifelong resident, knew the mountains like his own hand. No body, no gear, nothing. My blood ran cold. The dates, 30 years apart, almost to the day. It was a statistical anomaly, a coincidence too sharp and too perfect to be ignored. I dug deeper, my hands dusty from forgotten history. Each report was thin, a few pages of terse, formal language that said almost nothing. They documented the search efforts, listed the personnel involved, and ended with the same hollow conclusion. Case suspended, presumed deceased. It felt less like a record of an investigation and more like a carefully constructed wall, a set of documents designed to close a door on something that no one wanted to look at too closely. And in the margin of the 1963 report, written in the faded blue ink of a fountain pen, was a single, handwritten annotation from a ranger whose name I didn't recognize. The cycle holds, it said. The offering was not enough. Sleep didn't come. How could it? The words, "the offering was not enough," had burned themselves onto the back of my eyelids. At 0500, with the sky outside still a bruised purple, I was back in Ben's office. I hadn't gone home. I laid the three files, 1963, 1993, and the new one for Julian Hayes, side by side on the polished surface of his desk, forming a neat, undeniable timeline of loss. The fluorescent lights of the office hummed, casting a sterile glare on the brittle, yellowed paper. When Ben arrived, clutching a steaming thermos, he didn't seem surprised to see me. He simply paused in the doorway, took in the tableau on his desk, and let out a long, slow sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 30 years. "Figured you'd end up in the archives," he said, his voice gravelly with mourning. "Most of the good ones do." "This isn't good, Ben. This is a pattern," I stated, my voice tight with a mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. 3 disappearances, same sector, same time of year, exactly 30 years apart. Sarah Jenkins, Michael Reed, and now Julian Hayes. These aren't separate incidents, they're scheduled events. He walked past me and poured coffee into a chipped ceramic mug. He didn't look at the files, he didn't have to. "You're seeing the shape of it, Vance, but you're not looking at the pages themselves." He gestured with his mug. "Look at the reports. Not the dates, the content." I frowned, flipping open the 1993 file for Sarah Jenkins. The first few pages were standard, witness statements, vehicle description, equipment list. But then it started. An entire section on geological surveys was replaced by a single page detailing barometric pressure readings for the week of the disappearance. In the 1963 file, a witness interview was missing, and in its place was a meticulous hand-drawn map of migratory bird patterns that had no relevance to a missing hunter. They weren't just blacked-out lines. They were deliberate, nonsensical substitutions. Official-looking gibberish meant to fill space and maintain the document's physical integrity. "These are corrupted," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Whole sections are missing, replaced with junk data. This is evidence tampering. It's information management, Ben corrected, his tone turning sharp, the voice of a supervisor addressing a subordinate. What you're holding are the public-facing documents, the versions we can release if some journalist or a congressman's aide gets a bug up their ass about cold cases. We have to account for every page, so we account for every page. It's a jurisdictional necessity. The phrase hung in the air between us, heavy and smelling of a lie. A necessity for what? To cover up incompetence? Or something worse? My mind was racing through a dozen different scenarios, from serial killers to departmental negligence. Ben took a long sip of his coffee, his gaze fixed on the mountains visible through his window, now catching the first rays of sun. Worse, he said, his voice dropping low. Worse is when outside authorities get involved. People who don't understand the ground truth of this place. People who read the official handbook but don't know the rules. The rules are the handbook, Ben. We're National Park Service Rangers. That's the whole point. He finally turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw something beyond weariness in his eyes. It was a profound, bone-deep sorrow. The handbook is for lost tourists and poachers. It's for budget reports and congressional oversight. It has procedures for bear encounters, for wildfires, for floods. It has absolutely nothing in it for this. He walked over to his desk, picked up the 1963 file, and tapped the handwritten note in the margin. The offering was not enough. He looked at me. Ranger Tom Calloway wrote that. He was my training officer when I was a rookie. He worked the Michael Reed case. He's the one who taught me the real protocols. A cold dread, heavier than any physical chill, washed over me. Unofficial protocols? The only ones that matter when the cycle comes around, he confirmed. A set of procedures passed from one supervisor to the next. They aren't written down in any log you'll ever find. They're a legacy, a burden. They are the actual job, Vance. Everything else is just keeping up appearances until the next time the woods need to be fed. He wasn't speaking in metaphors. I could hear it in his voice, the absolute, unshakable certainty. My world, built on the solid bedrock of procedure, evidence, and federal law, had just fractured, and I was staring down into the abyss that had opened at my feet. The search for Julian Hayes wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was something else entirely. The words, unofficial protocols, landed in the dead air of the office and went nowhere. They were a violation, an admission of a rot that ran deeper than simple doctored files. My training, my entire career, was built on the sanctity of procedure. Procedure was what separated us from chaos. It was the guardrail on the edge of a cliff. Ben was telling me that out here, the guardrail was a lie. Explain, I said. It wasn't a request. Right now, what is the ground truth of this place? Ben walked to the large topographical map that covered an entire wall, its surface a maze of contour lines and faded pencil marks. He ran a hand over the section marked Cascade Creek, a gesture that was almost a caress. We call it the Bridger Bloom, he began, his back still to me. It's not in any ecology textbook. It's a phenomenon, Vance, like an algal bloom in the ocean or a pressure release from a geothermal vent. It's a natural cycle. He turned and his eyes were dark with the effort of putting the unthinkable into words. And right now, it's waking up. The holler is getting hungry. Hungry for what? People? The question sounded absurd as soon as I voiced it, like a line from a bad movie. No, not like that, he said, shaking his head with a tired impatience. It's not a predator, it's a process. Think of it like a buildup of energy, tectonic stress, maybe geomagnetic. I don't know the physics of it, nobody does. All I know is that every 30 years, this specific area becomes unstable. It needs to reach a state of equilibrium. It needs to be balanced, appeased. If it isn't, the instability spreads. The silence in the woods yesterday, the flickering GPS units, They weren't glitches, they were symptoms. Appeased with what? What was the offering that Tom Calloway said wasn't enough? Ben's face tightened, the lines around his eyes deepening. He looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. Tom. Tom Calloway thought it was a sacrifice. He was a good man, but he was a man of an older time, steeped in the stories the Shoshone used to tell about this place. In '63, when Michael Reed went missing, Tom and his team tried to placate it. Old rituals, burned offerings of game, symbols carved into trees. It did nothing. The bloom took Reed anyway. Tom found a piece of his rifle, twisted like it had been put in a forge. That was all. He let the image hang in the air. It broke him. Not the search, but the knowledge. The certainty that he was standing guard over something he could never understand, let alone fight. He transferred to a desk job in Utah 6 months later. Last I heard, he spent his last 20 years staring at the desert, drinking himself to death. That's the personal cost of this, Vance. You don't just carry the protocol, you carry what happened to the people who failed. My throat was dry. This wasn't a story, it was a warning. It was the fine print on a contract I had unknowingly signed the day I accepted this posting. So, the 1993 incident, Sarah Jenkins, I prompted, my voice barely a whisper. What happened then? By then we had a better idea of what we were dealing with. Tom's successor realized it wasn't about superstition. It was about resonance, frequencies. The bloom reacts to certain stimuli. It's agitated by modern electronics, for one. The more digital noise you pump into that valley, the more erratic it becomes. The protocol my supervisor taught me was about dampening, not sacrificing. We introduced specific minerals into the soil, used sonic emitters to create a countervailing frequency. We tried to soothe it back to sleep. But it took her anyway, I finished for him. It took her anyway, he confirmed, his voice flat. Our containment was better, but it wasn't perfect. We reduced the effect, but we couldn't stop it. We just fed it. We managed the incident, contained the damage to a single loss of life, and then we buried it under a mountain of redacted paperwork for another 30 years. Our job is not to win, Vance. It's to make sure that when we lose small. He finally looked at me, a direct, piercing gaze that felt like a physical weight. I was on that team in '93. I'm the only one left. Now it's my watch, and it's happening again. And I need someone who knows. I need someone who understands that the search for Julian Hayes isn't about finding him alive. It's about performing the protocol correctly so that he is the only one we lose. The SAR operation for Julian Hayes officially remained active, but its nature had fundamentally changed. On the morning of the third day, it was no longer a search, it was a holding pattern, a piece of theater we performed for the benefit of dispatch and the public record. My team ran their grids, called in their regular reports of no contact, and adhered to Ben's strict order to stay west of Cascade Creek. I knew now that their real purpose wasn't to find Julian, but to serve as a perimeter, a line of official presence meant to keep anyone else from wandering into the bloom's expanding zone of influence. The escalation was no longer subtle. The day was unnaturally quiet, the air thick and heavy as if before a thunderstorm, but the sky was a perfect, cloudless blue. Around 1100, a call came in from one of the search teams. Their lead, a young ranger named Peterson, sounded rattled. Bridger Station, this is SAR Alpha. We have an issue with our navigational equipment. All 3 of our compasses are spinning. They're useless. Confirm your GPS status, Alpha, I responded, my voice betraying none of the cold certainty I felt. That's the other thing, ma'am. The units can't acquire a signal. It's like the sky just turned off. Ben was standing beside me, listening to the transmission on the main console speaker. He met my eyes and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The time for waiting was over. Alpha Team, deploy your emergency beacon and hold your position, I ordered. We'll vector in on your signal for extraction. Ben shut off the speaker. They won't get a signal out, he said quietly. It's pulling in too much energy now. Get your pack. It's time. He didn't lead me to the armory. Instead, we went to a small, windowless supply shed behind the main station, a place I'd assumed was full of old trail signs and spare tires. He unlocked 3 separate deadbolts, and inside, the air was cool and smelled of ozone and dust. On a metal workbench sat a large, reinforced Pelican case. He unlatched it, and the contents looked like something out of a physicist's fever dream. There were 4 cylindrical devices, about the size of thermos flasks, made of a dull, non-reflective metal and covered in complex-looking dials. Coils of copper wire were bundled neatly beside them. There were also several canvas bags filled with what looked like crushed rock. One was a dark, magnetic black, another a pale, milky quartz. But the strangest items were 3 artifacts, each resting in a custom-cut foam niche. One was a piece of obsidian, polished into a perfect sphere. Another was a fulgurite, a jagged tube of sand fused into glass by a lightning strike. The last was a simple, weathered bison horn, its surface covered in carvings I didn't recognize. "This is the offering," Ben said, his voice low and reverent. "Not blood, not sacrifice. Balance. The bloom is a chaotic resonance. We counter it with harmony." He picked up one of the metal cylinders. Sonic emitters. They produce a low-frequency hum, below the range of human hearing. We deploy them at 4 cardinal points around the epicenter. They create a sort of acoustic fence, a resonant field that contains the instability. He then pointed to the bags of rock. Lodestone and piezoelectric quartz. We seed the ground with them. They dampen the geomagnetic fluctuations, ground out the excess energy. My gaze fell on the 3 artifacts. "And these?" "Anchors," he said, "older than any of this. They have properties. The obsidian absorbs light and energy. The fulgurite channels and grounds electrical charge. The horn. The horn is different. It resonates with biological energy. We place them at the heart of the epicenter. Together they form a focal point, a drain through which the bloom's energy can stabilize and recede." He looked at me, his expression grim. "The procedure is delicate. Everything has to be deployed in the right sequence, at the right time. One mistake, one loud noise or stray radio signal at the wrong moment, and you don't just fail to contain it, you agitate it, you make it worse." As if on cue, a low, guttural sound echoed from the direction of the mountains. It wasn't an animal. It was a deep, vibratory thrum that I felt in the bones of my teeth more than I heard with my ears. It was the sound of something immense shifting in its sleep. "We have to go now," Ben said, already loading the emitters into a specialized pack. "While the bloom is still coalescing, once it fully wakes, no protocol will be enough to soothe it." He handed me the pack containing the anchors and the mineral bags. The weight was significant, but it was the other weight, the crushing burden of what he was asking me to do, that threatened to buckle my knees. This was the real job. This was the unwritten chapter in the Ranger's Handbook, the truth hidden behind decades of black ink and jurisdictional necessity. We weren't just going to appease the woods, we were going to tune it. We had the packs on our shoulders, the cold, dense weight of the emitters and anchors, a grim reality, against our backs. We were halfway to the truck when the sound of engines, not the familiar growl of a Park Service pickup, but the smoother, more powerful hum of government sedans, cut through the morning air. 3 black vehicles, clean enough to reflect the jagged peaks of the Tetons, crunched to a halt on the gravel outside the station. The lead car's door opened, and a man in a crisp suit stepped out. He moved with a clipped, urban efficiency that was jarringly out of place in the vast, slow silence of the Wyoming wilderness. "Supervisory Ranger Carter?" the man asked, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. His voice was sharp, accustomed to being obeyed. Ben set his pack down slowly, his face a mask of weary resignation. He had seen this before. or something like it. I'm Carter, and you are? The man flipped open a leather wallet, flashing a gold badge. Special Agent David Morales, FBI. I'm taking lead on the Julian Hayes disappearance and its connection to the Jenkins case of 93 and the Reed case of 63. My blood went cold. He knew the timeline. He'd seen the pattern. But the conclusion he'd drawn was a world away from the truth. This is Park Service jurisdiction, Agent Morales, Ben said, his tone carefully neutral. We appreciate the offer of federal assistance, but we have the situation under control. Morales gave a humorless smile. With all due respect, Ranger, 3 people vanishing from the same 10-mile patch of woods on a 30-year cycle isn't a situation. It's a hunting ground. Our violent criminal apprehension program flagged the pattern last week. We believe you have a long-term, cyclical predator operating in your park, a serial killer. He said the words serial killer as if they were a magic key, an explanation that would make all the strangeness neat and understandable. To him, the woods were just a backdrop, a crime scene. He couldn't conceive that the crime scene itself was the perpetrator. We've considered all possibilities, I said, stepping forward. I was trying to project calm authority, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. At this time, there is no evidence to support a theory of foul play. Morales finally looked at me, his gaze analytical and dismissive. Ranger Vance, is it? I read your initial report, and I've also read the creative incident logs for the previous cases, the ones your office saw fit to redact into nonsense. That looks a lot like a cover-up to me. Obstruction of a federal investigation, in fact. We are managing a complex wilderness SAR operation, Ben cut in, his voice hardening. There are environmental factors in that sector you don't understand. Unstable ground, unpredictable magnetic interference affecting communications. That's why we've restricted access. It was a masterful lie, woven from threads of truth. Morales laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. Magnetic interference? That's your official story? I have a team on the way with ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, and a communications suite that could broadcast from the bottom of a mine shaft. Your interference won't be an issue. He looked past us, toward the trail leading to Cascade Creek. We're going to set up a mobile command post at the fork, and my teams will begin a full forensic sweep of the entire valley, east and west of the creek. We're not losing another one. This was the moment Ben had warned about, the catastrophic arrival of people who knew the handbook, but not the rules. Their advanced electronics, the sheer noise and energy of a large-scale federal operation, it would be like throwing a lit match into a gas-filled room. It would agitate the bloom beyond any hope of containment. That is not an option, Ben said, and the soft-spoken supervisor was gone. In his place was a man defending a border against an invading army. That area is closed. Per Park Service regulations, I am closing the entire sector due to hazardous conditions. Your teams will remain here at the station. Morales' face hardened. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, threatening hiss. Let me be perfectly clear, Ranger. This is now a federal crime scene. Your jurisdiction ends where my investigation begins. You will stand down. You will give my team your full cooperation, and you will stay out of our way. If you attempt to interfere, I will have you and Ranger Vance arrested for obstructing justice. Is that understood? He didn't wait for an answer. He turned on his heel and began barking orders into a radio, and in moments the parking lot was swarming with men in tactical gear, unloading cases of high-tech equipment. They were loud, efficient, and utterly oblivious to the delicate balance they were about to shatter. Ben and I could only stand and watch, the heavy packs at our feet feeling less like tools for containment and more like relics of a plan that had already failed. The unofficial protocol had no procedure for dealing with this. The rules had no defense against a man who refused to believe they even existed. The first sign of the breach wasn't a sound, but a feeling. It started the moment the FBI helicopter, a black dragonfly of tactical arrogance, thundered over the ridgeline and began to circle the valley. It was a pressure in my sinuses, a low-frequency hum that vibrated up through the soles of my boots. Ben felt it too. He flinched, his hand instinctively going to the pack containing the sonic emitters, as if he could deploy them from a mile away and shield the holler from the storm that was coming. Morales had established his command post less than a quarter-mile from the trailhead, a chaotic cluster of tents and portable satellite dishes. He was directing his teams with the detached precision of a general, pushing them across Cascade Creek and into the heart of the epicenter. "Ground-penetrating radar is live," a technician called out. "Thermal imaging sweep commencing." Every word was a violation. Every radio squawk, every electronic pulse they pumped into the ground was a new provocation. It was like watching a group of children poke a sleeping bear with sharpened sticks. The response was not immediate, but it was total. It began with a sound, the same deep thrum we'd heard earlier, but now it was a constant, resonant growl that made the air feel thick as water. Then, the FBI's expensive equipment began to die. "Comms are down," someone shouted. "We've got nothing but static." It wasn't just static. A high-pitched shriek, a feedback loop from hell, erupted from their main communications tent, a noise so piercing it sent agents stumbling back, clutching their ears. A thin tendril of smoke curled from the antenna array. Morales's face, a mask of smug authority moments before, was now laced with confusion. "Switch to backup channels. Get me a signal." But there were no backup channels. The sky had not just turned off, as Peterson had said. It was actively hostile. A cascade failure swept through their camp. Laptops flickered and went dark. The powerful lamps they'd set up to illuminate the forest edge popped, one by one, showering the ground in glass. The GPR unit began to emit a frantic, rhythmic series of pings before its screen went white and a line of molten plastic dripped from its casing. "It's an EMP, some kind of localized pulse," an agent yelled, but Ben and I knew better. This wasn't an electromagnetic pulse. It was a rebuttal. The bloom was being agitated, and it was pushing back against everything that was irritating it. The real chaos began when the forest itself joined in. The unnatural silence was replaced by a cacophony of snapping wood and a sound like tearing fabric on a planetary scale. Branches, heavy with pine, began to whip and thrash in the windless air, lashing at the agents who had ventured onto the trails. A massive lodgepole pine, a century old at least, groaned and then fell, not with the clean crack of a natural break, but with a sickening, twisting motion, as if it had been wrung out by a giant, unseen hand. It crashed directly across the main trail, cutting off two of Morales' teams from the command post. Panic ignited. The agents, trained for firefights and criminals, had no protocol for this. Their weapons were useless against an enemy they couldn't see. An enemy that was the ground beneath their feet and the air in their lungs. Their radio chatter, now limited to short-range handsets, was a frantic collage of fear. "Can't see. The trees are moving. Compass is just spinning. It's pointing straight down. Get back. Get back to the CP." Morales' commands had become choked, static-laced pleas. His tidy, organized investigation had devolved into a rout. Ben grabbed my arm, his knuckles white. "Forget the protocol. The containment field is compromised. We can't appease it now. It's about damage control." He pointed toward the equipment we'd carried. "The anchors. We might be able to use them to create a sink, a focal point to draw the worst of it away from them." He broke into a run, heading not for the epicenter, but for a high, rocky outcrop that overlooked the valley, a place where we might have a chance to deploy the artifacts without being swallowed by the chaos. I followed, my lungs burning. We were no longer practitioners of a delicate ritual. We were trying to ground a lightning storm with a bucket of sand. As we scrambled up the rocks, a man's scream, sharp and final, cut through the din from deep within the woods. Ben froze. He looked toward the sound, a flicker of duty warring with the impossible truth of the situation. He saw one of the federal agents, a young man, stumbling out of the trees near the creek bed, his face pale with terror. Behind him, the air seemed to shimmer and distort, like heat haze off asphalt. "Vance, the anchors! Get them ready!" Ben yelled, shoving his own pack into my hands. Before I could object, he was gone, sprinting down the scree slope toward the agent, pulling the heavy fulgurite from his belt. It wasn't part of the new plan. It was instinct. It was a ranger running toward the danger. I watched in horror as he reached the agent. He held the jagged fulgurite out, as if warding off a blow. For a moment, the shimmering air seemed to recoil. Then it coalesced, surging forward. There was no visible impact, no sound of a strike. Ben just stopped. He stood rigid for a second, his eyes wide, staring at something that wasn't there. Then he crumpled to the ground unconscious. The young agent, forgotten by the presence, scrambled away into the undergrowth, his sanity shattered. The Bloom's attention was no longer on the scattered agents. It was focused on the place where Ben had fallen. I was alone on the ridge, the weight of the anchors in my pack a leaden, impossible responsibility. The plan was gone. The protocol was broken. And the man who held all the answers was lying silent in the heart of the storm. For a long moment, I was paralyzed on that ridge. The world had dissolved into a disorienting symphony of inhuman noise and human terror. Below me, Ben lay still. Down in the valley, the survivors of Morales' team were scattering like ants from a flooded hill. They were the source of the chaos, the irritant that had provoked the Bloom into this waking nightmare. And in that moment, I understood. The original protocol was designed for a quiet appeasement. It was a lullaby. You can't sing a lullaby in the middle of a war zone. The protocol had to be adapted. The chaos itself had to become part of the offering. With a clarity born of pure desperation, I understood what I had to do. The Bloom was drawn to the noise, to the panic, to the electronic death screams of the FBI's equipment. I couldn't fight that current. I had to redirect it. I scrambled down from my perch, not toward Ben, but on a parallel path, keeping to the high ground. My target wasn't the original epicenter deep in the woods. My new target was the source of the greatest agitation, Morales' wrecked command post. I moved with a purpose that felt alien, my fear replaced by a cold, sharp focus. The forest thrashed around me, but it felt directionless, its rage unfocused. I skirted the main path, using the chaos as cover. When I reached the edge of the clearing where the FBI had made their stand, the scene was one of utter ruin. Equipment was smashed and melted. 2 agents lay half-buried under the massive pine that had fallen. Morales was on his knees, staring at a satellite dish that was slowly buckling inward, as if under immense pressure. He was muttering about jurisdictions in federal authority, his mind fractured by a reality he could not process. He was the perfect lure. I found a small granite outcrop just inside the tree line, overlooking the camp. It was a nexus point, a place where I could feel the invisible energies of the valley converging. I pulled the 3 anchors from the pack. My hands were steady. First, the obsidian sphere. I placed it in a crevice, and the ambient hum of the Bloom seemed to quiet for a heartbeat, as if the dark stone was drinking the sound. Next, the bison horn. I laid it on the flat rock facing the panicked agents, and I felt a sympathetic vibration in my own chest, a resonance with the raw fear pouring out of them. They were now part of the circuit. Finally, I took the fulgurite Ben had dropped. It felt warm, charged with a residual energy from his encounter. This was the ground wire. I wedged it deep into a crack in the rock, pushing it down until it connected with the earth. The moment it was set, the 3 anchors formed a new focal point. The wild, chaotic energy of the Bloom, which had been lashing out in all directions, now had a place to go. It began to flow, not with a violent surge, but with the inexorable pull of a whirlpool, draining toward the anchors. The thrashing of the trees slowed. The deafening hum subsided, replaced by a sound like a long, slow exhalation that seemed to come from the ground itself. The pressure in the air vanished. In the space of 2 minutes, the active, violent presence was gone. The silence that fell was profound, deeper than before, the exhausted quiet of a storm that has finally broken. We found 7 FBI agents in the aftermath. 2 were deceased. The other 5, including Morales, were alive but psychologically shattered, left with a permanent 1,000-yard stare. Ben was alive too, but the man I helped carry back to the station was a hollow shell. The part of him that was Ben Carter, supervisory ranger, was gone. He looked at me, but his eyes were focused on a place 30 years in the past, or maybe 30 years in the future. He had taken the full force of the Bloom's attention, and it had burned him clean. My official incident report is a masterwork of fiction. I have discovered, a very good liar. I wrote of a sudden, bizarre weather event, a freak geophysical phenomenon known as a thunderstorm asthma event, triggered by a dry lightning strike that released a massive cloud of allergenic pollen, combined with a powerful microburst. It explained the respiratory distress, the confusion, the equipment malfunctions due to extreme static electricity, and the falling trees. It was scientifically plausible enough to be unchallengeable, especially when the survivors' testimonies were the incoherent ramblings of traumatized men. The report closes the case on Julian Hayes and on the lost federal agents, burying them all under the clean, sterile language of a tragic, unavoidable accident. The watch has been passed. The unofficial protocol is mine now, a weight in my gut that will never go away. I have the files, the equipment, and the unshareable knowledge. For the next 30 years, my job is to keep up appearances, to handle lost tourists and poachers, and to wait, to watch the calendar, and to listen for the first, faint signs that the holler is starting to get hungry again. We began with the idea that a ranger's real job isn't just to keep people safe from the woods, but to keep the woods safe from us. Now we see the profound cost of that duty, a quiet, unshareable burden passed from one generation to the next. The most important work is what can never be written in an official incident report, buried under a silence that maintains the fragile peace we take for granted. Thank you for listening to this story here on Silent Whispers. The choices made in these isolated places are never simple. I have to ask, do you think Alara made the right choice in using the FBI's chaotic intrusion as part of the offering to appease the Bloom? We appreciate you spending this time with us, and we'll be back soon. Until then, be well. Next time, we'll find out what happens when one of those anchors goes missing, 30 years ahead of schedule.